All right now, living environment fans, it's Friday. Want to get down on Friday. Everybody's looking forward to the weekend, partying. Yeah, party, fun. Yeah, looking forward to the weekend. It's Friday. Let's get through Friday first. And today in class, of course, we'll talk a little bit more about the birds, the bees, and as I mentioned to you yesterday, the marine flatworms and the seahorses and the coral reef wrasse. Some interesting stuff. So let's do this Bellringer. Pronto.
All right.
Hey now.
Mr. Kovacs class. It's Mr. Kovacs class. You might learn a ton. It's Mr. Kovacs class.
It's interesting too.
It's Mr. Kovacs class.
And he's super cool.
It's Mr. Kovacs class.
It's nice to sit down and have the talk. The talk about all that good stuff. Today, what you need to know by the end of the period is you need to know gametes. You need to know what meiosis is. You need to know what it means to be haploid, to be diploid. And you need to know the difference between fertilization and pregnancy. If we can tackle those things, that would be great today. So let's do that now. Topic of gametes to you yesterday in class. Gametes are those haploid, half cells, right? Made during, for sexual reproduction in order to basically take two half cells and combine them to make one new whole cell, right? When two gametes come together to make a new whole cell, we call that fertilization, right? And the gamete that's been fertilized, we now change its name to a zygote, right? So we've got haploid gametes, they're haploid. If two gametes meet, we have fertilization, and then we have a zygote, which is diploid, a full set of chromosomes. Okay? How do you make haploid cells, haploid gametes? You do meiosis. I mentioned before, meiosis is basically copy once, split twice. And you wind up with 4 daughter cells. We call them gametes. And each of the daughter cells has half of the DNA that you started with. See? Started with one red and one blue. Now this one has just one red, one different red, one blue, another blue. So notice how they went from full set, they doubled, split, and now have half a set. That's called meiosis. The 2 types of gametes we're going to concentrate on are the small ones. We call the small ones sperm cells. They basically are just a nucleus. And then the large ones. The large ones have a nucleus, but everything else going on in that cell. We call the large ones eggs. Right? Some of you are small gamete makers. Some of you make sperm. Some of you are large gamete makers. Some of you make eggs. Right? We try not to call them, we don't think of them as male and female. It's not really anything to do with your gender or what you identify with. It has to do with what you make. You either make sperm or you make egg. Right? Unless you're a hermaphrodite, then you make both. Or unless you're agonal, then you don't make either. Making sperm cells happens through meiosis. You have a diploid parent cell, a spermatocyte, and it goes copies once, splits again, you wind up with 4 sperm cells, right? They're haploid. They have half of the genes you need to be a person. Here's some sperm cells, and they're really rinky-dink little cells. They're basically just a nucleus. That's the head of the sperm cell. And then they do have a tail for swimming, a flagellum. It has some mitochondria that allows them to wiggle their way through the reproductive tract, right? But sperm cells, the small gamete. Egg cells, the large gamete, they go through meiosis also. They do copy once, split twice. But each time they split, they shift their cytoplasm, right? They shift their cytoplasm so that they wind up with just one big cell at the end and 3 little rinky-dink cells. We call the rinky-dink cells polar bodies. The big cell is the ovum or the egg. And it is huge compared to a sperm cell, massive. It's got half a nucleus in it, but it's got everything else in there. There's cytoplasm, there's mitochondria, there's lysosomes, there's vacuoles, there's Golgi bodies, there's ribosomes, there's all those things that you think of that you need to be a cell are in an egg. And because of that, eggs are much more hardy, much more, they can live longer than sperm cells. Sperm cells last just a few days, whereas eggs can last weeks, like 3 to 4 weeks with an egg. Egg maker makes an egg in the ovary. When they release that egg into the fallopian tube, we call that ovulation. Ovulation. This egg moves really slowly. An egg takes about a week to go from here, right here, out into the beginning of the fallopian tube, about a week before it gets to the uterus. Right? It's moving really slow. That's only a few inches, and it takes a week. It's really slow. Right? If that egg's been released and a woman's had unprotected sex, she's at risk of getting pregnant. But of course, how does that happen? Sperm cells swim through the vagina, through this little opening called the cervix, through the uterus. Half of them go the wrong way, down the wrong fallopian tube. The other half of them go the right way, but they get turned. Some get turned around. Some get attacked by immune system cells. Some don't make it. But eventually, we get to about 100 or so that are left to face the egg. And if one fuses from the egg, we say that the egg is fertilized. And then it can take a week, like as much as a week, depending on where the egg is in here, before that egg gets to the uterus and implants in the uterus and the woman is pregnant. Fertilization happens first. Pregnancy doesn't happen until that fertilized egg sticks to the uterus. By then, it's actually more than just an egg. It's a blastula. It's a big ball of cells, and it sticks to the uterus, and mom is pregnant, right? So remember, it can be like, sperm cells can live for a week in here, right? A few days anyway, 3 to 5 days. And this egg lasts for weeks, right? So you could have unprotected sex and have not released an egg, but then 2 days later, that egg the egg you release is fertilized, right? And then you can also go from fertilized, right, to pregnant. If the egg doesn't stick to the uterus, mom doesn't get pregnant. And you talked about birth control in health class, so I'm not going to go too much over that, but you know that there's some methods of birth control that keep the egg from sticking to the uterus. That's a very effective way of keeping, not having a pregnancy. All right, we'll talk more about that later as we go. So you got your words today. You got meiosis, gamete, haploid, diploid, fertilization. What else did we come up with? Zygote is a new word. Of course, sperm and egg, those probably aren't new words for you. But lots of good vocabulary to know as we move on, talking about genes and the mixing of genes.